You take more than you give back, not as a moral failing, as a structural feature of the world you were born into. The food that arrives without acknowledgement of the soil it came from, the water consumed without relationship to the watershed that produced it, the energy, the materials, the intricate systems of natural process that your life runs on, received, used, and largely unacknowledged. The economy that surrounds you was built on the assumption that the earth is a resource, extraction is normal, and the relationship between human beings and the natural world is one-directional by design. And somewhere in the living of this, in the comfort and the convenience and the remarkable efficiency of a civilization organized around taking, something has begun to feel like a debt. Not a financial debt, something older and less nameable, the specific unease of a person who has been receiving for a long time without giving back, who suspects the receiving is not as sustainable as it has been made to appear, who feels, however faintly, however inarticulate, that the relationship they are inside is not a balanced one. The Andean philosophical tradition of the Pachamama, the Earth Mother, the living cosmic force that animates and sustains the natural world, was built to address exactly this unease, not to produce guilt, to restore the relationship, to reintroduce in the most practical and embodied way possible the principle that the Andean tradition places at the center of everything, Ayni, reciprocity, the sacred obligation of return. There is a specific impoverishment in a life organized entirely around extraction, and the culture that produced it has been careful not to give this impoverishment a name. You consume the day's attention supply in the morning and spend the afternoon in the deficit that the depletion produces. You take from the relationships around you, the support, the care, the goodwill that other people's presence provides, and find in the seasons when your own capacity to give is low that the balance has become uncomfortable. You draw on the natural world, the air, the food, the beauty that the living earth keeps providing regardless of whether you acknowledge the providing, and feel, in moments of honesty, that the drawing has been happening without the returning. The modern economy does not have a category for this. It has a category for financial debt and a category for environmental impact. It does not have a category for the specific, relational, cosmologically serious debt that the Andean tradition recognized as the fundamental condition of a life lived on the earth, the debt to the living systems that sustain you, the obligation of return that comes with every act of receiving. The Pachamama is not a metaphor for environmental policy. In the Andean understanding, she is a living presence, the earth and time and the cosmic force that animates both. The relationship with the Pachamama is not a relationship with a resource. It is a relationship with a being, and the principle that governs every relationship between beings, between humans, between communities, between the human world and the natural world is Ayni. What you receive, you return. What is given to you, you give back, in kind and in spirit, not as transaction, as the living reciprocity that keeps every relationship and the world itself in balance. The Andean philosophical tradition is not the property of a single author or a single text. It is a living cosmological system carried across millennia by the indigenous peoples of the Andes, the Quechua and Aymara-speaking communities of what is now Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and the surrounding regions. It is expressed in ceremony, in agricultural practice, in the specific forms of communal organization and decision-making that have sustained Andean communities through conquest, colonization, and the sustained pressure of 5 centuries of imposed alternatives. The word Pachamama is Quechua. Pacha means earth, time, world,
cosmos, a single word that carries what the Western tradition would require several different concepts to name, pointing at the understanding that space and time and the material world and the cosmic order are not separate categories, but aspects of a single living reality. Mama means mother, not in the sentimental sense, but in the functional sense of the one who sustains, nourishes, holds, and receives. The Pachamama is the living ground of everything, the earth beneath the feet, the passage of seasons, the cycle of growth and death and return that makes the continuation of life possible.
The relationship with the Pachamama is governed by three interconnected principles. Ayni is the most fundamental, the sacred reciprocity, the obligation of return. If you take from the earth, you give back. If the earth gives you a harvest, you offer ceremony, gratitude, a portion of what was received. The offering is not symbolic, it is the recognition of a real relationship between a receiving being and a giving one, and the practice of maintaining that relationship through the discipline of conscious return. The second principle is Sumak Kausai, the good life, buen vivir. Not the good life as accumulation, as the achievement of sufficient material prosperity. The good life as the quality of relationship with the earth, with the community, with the ancestors, with the living systems that sustain all of it. A life is good not when it has enough, but when it is in right relationship, when the giving and the taking are balanced, when the individual flourishing does not come at the cost of the communal and ecological flourishing that makes individual flourishing possible. The third is Pacha, the understanding of time and reality as cyclical rather than linear. The modern economy is organized around linear progress, more, forward, upward, always. The Pachamama tradition is organized around the cycle, growth, harvest, rest, return, growth again. The seasons are not stages on the way to something else, they are the nature of things. And the life that is in harmony with this cycle, that rests when rest is required, returns what was received, allows endings to be complete before beginnings begin, is the life that participates in the natural order rather than fighting against it. The Ecuadorian Constitution, reformed in 2008, became the first in the world to recognize the rights of nature, specifically the rights of the Pachamama, as a legal entity, not a resource with regulated use, a being with rights. The philosophical tradition that the Andean communities had been carrying for millennia found in that constitutional moment its most visible expression in the political structures of the modern world. The philosophy at the center. Two ideas that, received together, reorganize the relationship between the self and the world it lives in. The first is that the earth is not a resource. This is not an environmental argument in the policy sense. It is a relational argument. The difference between a resource and a being is the difference between something you can extract from without obligation and something whose giving requires your acknowledgement and your return. The tree that you cut for lumber is, in the Pachamama understanding, a being who gave something. The giving requires a response, not a transaction, an acknowledgement. The ceremony before the cutting, the gratitude for what was received, the replanting, or the rest, or the specific act of return that says, I received this, I know I received this, I accept the obligation that receiving creates. This reframe does not require you to believe in animism in the literal sense. It requires you to notice what happens to your relationship with the natural world when you treat it as a being giving rather than a resource available. The food eaten with awareness of the chain of beings and processes that produced it. The water used with acknowledgement of the watershed that collected it. The morning walked outside with the specific quality of attention that meets the living world as a presence rather than a backdrop. Something changes, not in the world, in you.
in the quality of the relationship, in the specific, available, genuinely nourishing quality of a life that is in acknowledged relationship with what sustains it. The second idea is that reciprocity is not generosity. Ayni is not the optional extra that the generous person adds to the extraction that everyone does. It is the structural condition of sustainable relationship. The relationship that takes without returning is not a relationship, it is consumption. And consumption, sustained long enough, produces exactly the condition that the modern world finds itself in: the depletion of the systems that the consuming depends on, with the specific quality of unease that comes from a debt being accumulated that the accounting system does not yet know how to record. Ayni says the recording is not optional. The debt exists whether it is acknowledged or not, and the life that practices the conscious acknowledgement, that builds into its daily rhythms some form of intentional return, some practice of giving back to what gives, is not merely a more ethical life, it is a more alive one, more genuinely embedded in the living world, more nourished by the relationship that acknowledgement restores.
Now, the bridge. Because the Pachamama tradition is the living inheritance of specific indigenous Andean communities, a tradition that has survived centuries of colonization and that belongs, in a way that requires careful acknowledgement, to the people who carried it. The philosophical principles, however, Ayni, Sumak, Kawsay, the cyclical understanding of time, translate into every life, in every context, without appropriating what does not belong to the person receiving them. The meal eaten in acknowledgement of the chain of beings and processes that produced it. The water used with awareness of its source. The morning walked in the specific quality of attention that notices the living world as a presence. The garden that is tended because tending is reciprocity, not because the vegetables are more cost-effective than the grocery store. And the principle at a larger scale. The community that gave you the education, the culture, the relationships that formed the self you are, what is being returned? The natural systems that sustain the life you are living, what acknowledgement, what practice of return, what specific act of reciprocity is being offered? These are not rhetorical questions. In the Pachamama tradition, they are the most practical questions available, because the life organized around them, the life that builds reciprocity into its daily rhythms, that treats the giving of the earth and the community as a relationship requiring response, that structures time around the cycle rather than the linear accumulation, is not merely a more responsible life, it is a more alive one, more embedded, more genuinely nourished, more at home in the world that it is living in and drawing from, and finally, giving back to. Here is what the Pachamama asks of you, practically, today. First, find one act of acknowledgement. Not donation, not carbon offset. The Pachamama tradition is not organized around compensation. It is organized around acknowledgement, the specific, present, embodied act of recognizing a relationship that the busy life renders invisible. Today, once, acknowledge something that sustains you. The food on the table, before eating, a moment of genuine recognition of the chain of soil and rain and labor and living systems that produced it. The air breathed, one conscious breath taken with awareness of the atmosphere that makes breathing possible. The water used, one moment of acknowledgement of the watershed, the rain, the aquifer. Not ritual in the elaborate sense. The simple, available, profoundly countercultural act of noticing that you are being sustained by something that is not you, and saying, in whatever form feels honest, that you know it. Second, find one form of return. Ayni requires the return, not the symbolic return, the specific, material, genuinely effortful act of giving back to something that is given to you. The garden planted, the tree grown, the volunteer hour given to the organization that sustains the community. The specific, local, entirely available act that moves energy back into the system that has been moving energy toward you. Find one thing, not ambitious, specific, the most immediate and available form of return that your current life makes possible, and do it with the explicit intention of reciprocity, not as charity, not as self-improvement, not as the productivity culture investment that expects a return, as Ayni, because the giving is the obligation of the receiving, because the relationship requires it, because the balance matters. Third, restructure one rhythm around the cycle rather than the line. The Pachamama philosophy is organized around cycles: the rest that follows the harvest, the fallow that precedes the new growth, the ending that must complete itself before the beginning can be genuine. Find one area of your life that is organized around linear accumulation, more, forward, always, and introduce one rhythm of the cycle, the project that is allowed to be finished before the next one begins, the season of rest that is not just recovery for more productivity, but rest as its own valid phase, the ending that is honored as an ending rather than immediately repurposed as the beginning of something else. This is Pachamama philosophy applied to the structure of time, the life that moves in cycles, that rests, returns, honors endings, allows the fallow, is the life that is in harmony with the natural order. And the natural order, the Andean tradition has been insisting for millennia, is not an inconvenience to be optimized around. It is the condition of genuine flourishing. Fourth, build one relationship with a specific place. The Pachamama philosophy is not abstract, it is rooted, literally, in the specific piece of earth beneath specific feet. The relationship that the Andean communities have with their land is not the modern relationship of the person who lives somewhere until a better opportunity appears elsewhere. It is the relationship of the person who is from somewhere, whose identity is embedded in a specific piece of the Earth's surface, whose practices of reciprocity are directed toward the specific watershed, the specific soil, the specific community of living beings that constitute the place they inhabit. You may not be able to achieve this depth of rootedness immediately, but you can take one step toward it. Learn the watershed you live in, where the water comes from, where it goes. Learn one plant that grows near you, not from a search engine, but from looking at it long enough that you know it. Build one relationship with one specific aspect of the living world you inhabit, not as a hobby, as the beginning of the reciprocal relationship that the Pachamama tradition says is the foundation of everything that genuinely sustains a human life. I want to close with the image that the Pachamama philosophy returns me to most often, not the constitutional rights of nature or the academic philosophy of buen vivir. The ceremony before the planting. The Andean farmer who, before putting the seed into the earth, pauses, offers something: coca leaves, a libation, a prayer, a moment of genuine acknowledgement, not to an abstract deity, to the specific piece of earth that is about to receive the seed. The recognition that this ground has been giving for a long time, giving harvests, giving sustenance, giving the condition of life itself, and that the giving requires a response before the next asking begins. The pause before the planting is not superstition, it is the most practical thing the farmer does, because it is the act that makes the relationship conscious, that transforms the extraction into an exchange, that makes the farmer a participant in a living relationship rather than an operator of a resource, and the participant, a person who is in genuine relationship with the earth they farm, takes care of that earth in ways that the operator does not. The relationship changes the behavior. The acknowledgement changes the quality of the taking, and the quality of the taking determines whether the giving can continue. The seed goes into the acknowledged earth. The harvest comes from the relationship, not just the soil, and the relationship, maintained through the daily, ordinary, entirely available practice of Ayni, of conscious return, is what the Andean tradition calls the condition of Sumak Kawsay, the good life, not despite the obligation of reciprocity, because of it. Here is the question the Pachamama leaves us with today. What have you been receiving from the earth, from the community, from the relationships and systems and living processes that sustain your life without a practice of return? Not what should you feel guilty about, What relationship, if made conscious, would change the quality of your living? What act of acknowledgement, practiced daily, would restore the sense of embeddedness that the extractive life produces the absence of? And what is the simplest, most immediate, most specific form of Ayni available to you today? Leave that in the comments, because naming what you have been receiving and what you intend to return is the beginning of the practice. And the practice, the specific, daily, entirely available act of conscious reciprocity, is what the Andean tradition has been insisting for longer than the modern economy has existed, is the condition of the good life. Sumak Kausai, the life that gives as much as it takes, the life that is in relationship with what sustains it, the life that is finally at home in the world it lives in. I'll see you in the next one.